Okay, I'm going to suggest that we make a start. So I just want to start off with an apology. It seems that I have brought the weather with me from Scotland, so for that, I apologize. So 360 video has long been touted as the next big thing. And indeed, both newsrooms and charities are increasingly embracing the format to engage and immerse their respective audiences in stories from the developing world. More like story living than storytelling, the technology enables the filmmaker to place the viewer in the middle of the story, allowing the viewer to rub shoulders with children in diamond mines, to stand on a boat as it rescues migrants in the Mediterranean, or to witness firsthand what life is like for one Rohingya woman in a refugee camp. Back in 2015, a long time ago now in terms of technological advancements, virtual reality pioneer Chris Milk coined the now rather cliched term empathy engine in a TED talk. He said, and I quote, that immersive technology such as VR and 360 connect humans to other humans in a profound way that I've never seen before in any other form of media. And it can change people's perception of each other. And that's how I think virtual reality has the potential to actually change the world. So it's a machine, but through this machine we become more compassionate, we become more empathetic, and we become more connected. And ultimately we become more human. But some have argued that this not only overvalues the medium's impact, but this is a gross oversimplification of how an audience engages or reacts to immersive 360 video. Conversely, others have labeled 360 video as poverty porn 2.0. Poverty porn, also known as development porn, famine porn, or stereotype porn, has been defined as any type of media, be it written, photographed, or filmed, which exploits the poor's condition in order to generate the necessary sympathy for selling newspapers or increasing charitable donations or support for a given cause. It is a term also used to explain when media is created not in order to generate sympathy, but to generate sensationalism, to cause anger or outrage. And so one could argue that with the great immersive power of this new medium, a medium that journalists are still figuring out how best to utilize, comes great responsibility. So how do we best harness this new technology? How do we get the right balance between true immersion and telling stories with sensitivity? How do we show what life is like in extreme situations without being accused of being sensationalist or parasitic? And how seriously should we consider the risk of vicarious trauma? And should local filmmakers be used to mitigate the extent of a colonial gaze? Today's panel hopes to address some of these important questions. I've been asked to slow down. Too much espresso. Today's panel hopes to address some of these important questions. This session will hear from myself and 3 other experts who, using some examples, will highlight not only the ethical, but also the logistical challenges of using this format and how they overcame them. These speakers have been deliberately handpicked as they have a range of resources and approaches among them. I'll be sort of approaching things as an independent freelancer. We have Joe Inwood from the BBC, as someone who's obviously working for a large international outlet. We have Victoria, and I'm not actually sure how to pronounce your last name.
That's good, Dan.
Okay, I'm glad that I didn't try. Who's from Al Jazeera's VR hub, Contrast VR, who's doing some really interesting, innovative stuff with 360. And last but not least, we have Geoffrey Monnier from MSF, who again, a humanitarian organization that is using 360 for varying different reasons. Each panelist is going to have about 5 minutes to give a brief presentation. Then, rather talking at you for 75 minutes, and we don't want you to fall asleep, we thought it'd be more interesting instead to have a lively, organic discussion between us. And then I'm going to make sure that we open it up for at least 20 minutes at the end so that we can engage in a conversation with you as well and have a chat. And just one last reminder, for half an hour after the session ends, we are going to have a sort of impromptu, informal VR pop-up outside. So we've got some Google Cardboards, as you can see, and my colleagues have also brought some Samsung Gears with some of the movies they're going to be talking about preloaded on them. So we encourage you to come and chat with us after and immerse yourself in these not alternate realities, but in these otherworldly experiences. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Joe to kick things off.
Hi everyone. My name is Joe Inwood. I work for the BBC. Probably, actually, unlike Victoria, I don't work for a part that focuses specifically on VR. My job is, I'm a field producer. I go out specifically in the Middle East. And for me, my interest has always been how. My Is that on? Okay. Yes, so I don't know if I'll start that again, but I work for the BBC. My job isn't specifically 360. I sort of came to it almost not by accident, but I thought it seemed interesting a couple of years ago and started taking 360 cameras with me on what we call normal news gathering deployments. So I go out as a field producer, so I shoot, I edit, I do all of it. And what I then thought is, how can I add 360 into this workflow? How can we make it work? When should you do it and when shouldn't you do it? I think that's one of the things that we found is there are lots of times actually when 360 isn't appropriate at all. You know, I remember a conversation I overheard a couple of years ago, someone saying, oh, you're going to a press conference, why don't you take a 360 camera? And the answer should have come back, because it's really boring. What we've learned is it's all about place. The first thing to say again, as you'll know, this is a really new medium. It's what makes it so exciting. We don't have the established grammar. We don't have all of the established rules that exist and people stick to sometimes overly rigidly in other mediums. There's an evolving language, and that's why this is so exciting, but also why these conversations need to be had. To address the first question, if we can go on to the next slide. Is there a new editorial challenge here? Is there something fundamentally different about the way that we use 360? Now, I should say, this isn't a BBC policy thing. These are just my views. I don't work for the VR Hub. I work for myself and different units, so this is just my personal thoughts. I think there's often a sort of a rush to, not moral outrage, but certain moral uncertainty with new technology. Something comes out and instantly you can see the ways this is different. And so, for example, with 360, there are clearly issues around consent. How do you get informed consent from everyone when they're all on that boat? It's virtually impossible. And there are genuine questions around that. I don't have the answers to them. But what you can see here, up here, are two shots of the same event, one taken. The one on the left, that was a fixed point 360 camera, and the one on the right was from the big camera on my shoulder. And I think people forget, in thinking about how 360 is more invasive in some ways, they forget that in other ways it's far less invasive. So actually, whilst yes, you do see everything around you, you don't see the whites of people's eyes. And I think this comes actually addressing both whether it is poverty porn or whether it engenders empathy. People forget the limitations of it. So I think, yes, there are some ways in which it's more invasive, more intrusive, but others in which it's far less. And in fact, there's show a couple of clips.
You want the next slide?
No, the next clip, two clips. Okay. Sorry about this. And what you're about to see again is small sections from a 360 film of essentially the same event, and then what we did as the linear 16:9 video of the same thing. And you can see there are differences, there are similarities. I don't think it would be fair to label the first one poverty porn or intrusive, and the second one very different.
Which one would you like first?
Let's do the 360 one first, so the other one. Nearly with you. Make it full screen. Everyone is brought on board.
Sit down. Please sit down. Sit down. Act for everybody.
The migrants sleep across all three decks, and with the ship well over capacity, it is pretty crowded. And then if we show the second one, please.
Fortunate ones can pay for wooden boats, but they too are overcrowded and dangerous. We're on a rescue ship run by the charity Doctors Without Borders.
So far they've taken more than 600 people on board from 3 different boats, and there's another transfer that's ongoing at the moment.
Most are men, but there are also women and children. All have risked their lives to make the dangerous crossing.
And there we are. Not saying there's any definite answers from that, but I just thought it was worth showing you a couple of different things to illustrate some of the differences, some of the similarities, and at which point I'll hand over to Victoria.
Thank you. So I present Contrast VR, which is Al Jazeera's in-house media studio. We launched only last year in April, and we use new and emerging technologies to do more immersive and innovative human-centered journalism work. And we aim to transport the audience to the people and cultures hit hardest by inequality and conflict. And while doing that, we are focusing on people who are innovating, striving, and bringing about change. That's really important to us, to focus on the communities that actually are finding solutions to their situations. So let's see the trailer for like a reel to see where we've gone, to what places around the world we actually produce the stories from. Working.
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Yes, so we went to many places, but we haven't done this alone.
Yeah.
Because many of our projects have been possible only through collaborations with local talent and local professionals from around the world. And one of our initiatives, first initiatives, was My People, Our Stories, and it was born in April last year as well. This was a collaboration between Contrast and Samsung, and we wanted to train 8 filmmakers from Middle East and Africa. We wanted to support new and emerging talent and create this global network of 360 filmmakers from the Global South. Because Global South is the place, is the region where many of us, a lot of people in journalism want to do 360 stories from, but we don't make the VR 360 technology available to those people from there, so they can actually tell their own stories through their own perspective and be a part of this VR ecosystem of storytellers. And we left those cameras for the people who we trained so they can continue doing stories. So we not only got 8 really powerful videos and short documentaries out of this initiative, but we actually continue working with them and continue producing more stories. They always come up with pitches and they always know how to contact us. And then soon after that, we understood that this framework of community storytellers really fits us and our sort of larger editorial strategy. And in January, we trained 7 Syrian teenagers, the next slide, who were interested in filmmaking and storytelling, and we trained them how to use 360 cameras in the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. And they produced their first 360 documentaries from the camp. And the stories were really interesting. Nisreen, so Obada, 16-year-old, he documented his passion for football, and the girls on the right, they're interested in theater and how this helps them to go through their daily lives in Zaatari camp. And then the second point I want to make, how we do stories and how we work in our productions, is that we try to include as much local talent as possible in all our original productions, which are longer documentary films. And the recent documentary, Yemen Skies of Terror, which will be the next slide, we involved local Yemeni journalists. We again trained them and we gave them 360 cameras, and we got this rare footage from inside Yemen, and they were those stories that they actually wanted to tell and to show the world. We also involved the Yemeni musician who created music score for us. He was based in Sana'a, and Yemeni artists creating illustrations. So we had this big group of people, of professionals, who we came all together to try to make the story and involve so many different perspectives and actually involve the people who are living every day the war and who know what it feels to actually hear air raids and who have issues with internet, and we all strive to get past those challenges. The other films also for Oil in Our Creeks, the film about oil spill in Nigeria, we also work with local producers, local NGOs, local musicians, so this is our editorial strategy. And I cannot stress enough how important for us to not only tell stories about the communities, but with those communities. Because basically, for many people, the audience is just a story, but for those people, it's their life. And we should be very mindful about that. And when we work with those people, we want them to help us see things as they are. So it's different from the traditional fixing model. When you come to a place, you find a fixer who helps you facilitate your production, right? And he shows you what you want to see. So what we strive to do is that we see what they want us to see and what we need to see. So that's the difference. And also, this creates a very authentic, accurate representation of the issues we want to cover. And also diverse perspective. The next slide, it's very important for us, and you can see it from our team. It consists of mostly all women, and it's also, we are all from very diverse and international backgrounds. We have different approaches to many different things. And we think it's very important because when we are talking about mainstream global media, often it supports a white and male worldview. And we have this VR, which is a very new industry, and we are all just shaping it. So the way we approach stories and the way who creates those stories and the way we create the stories, it will shape what kind of stories we're gonna see with this medium, and we're gonna use this medium to tell those kind of stories.
Great. So I'll go next and then
Okay.
Geoffrey will be up. There we go. That's the one I wanted. So yeah, my name is Mark Ellison. I'm wearing two hats today as a panelist, but also a moderator. My day job is it's an odd thing. My day job is actually as a data journalist for the BBC, but I often am quite sad. I take my vacation time and unpaid leave to do projects internationally. I've regularly worked across the continent of Africa since 2011. My most recent project, which there's a photo of up on the screen there, was called House Without Windows. This project was set in the Central African Republic, and I set out to basically document how the ongoing conflict there specifically has impacted young children. The conflict effectively has been what I call an orphan factory. It's resulted in kids being orphaned, living on the streets. It's had a real impact on not only the health but the educational system. Many kids being forced to work, effectively forced into child labor, working in diamond mines and other things like that. There we go. Before I went out there, I thought, that from my own experience of working in the continent for a number of years, I know that there's a lot of reader fatigue around stories coming out of Africa. There's negative stereotypes about the continent, and so often people, I think, are turned off about reading stories coming out of the continent. And the media spotlight was only on the country really for the briefest of moments at the height of the violence back in 2013-14. So the challenge for me was, how do you try and re-engage an audience, back, on the continent, in the country, and how this conflict is impacting these young kids. And I was, conducting an interview with somebody from Doctors Without Borders, and I said, why do you think that Central African Republic doesn't have, as much media attention as, say, the Congo or South Sudan? And she shook her head and said, I don't really know why, but I essentially see the country as a house without windows. And what she meant by that was, without consistent, constant media attention, we, the outside be it the global north, we couldn't see in and see what was happening. So I decided I was going to use 360 to provide a virtual window into the house that is the Central African Republic, in a name to transport the reader to an environment that they'll never ever likely go to, so that they could experience what things are like on the ground. So we worked in the video. You can work alongside a child as they labour in a diamond mine. You can cycle around a refugee camp with an MSF worker, or you can experience what life is like living on the streets. So my hope is, this almost turns the viewer hopefully into a sort of armchair correspondent. It's going to hopefully engage, educate, and inform them. I just want to quickly show you just a clip from it. Hopefully. The pen is heavy, but the shovel is light. So goes the well-worn phrase that's whispered in the classrooms of Kano. Many parents here can't afford to send their kids to school in the southwest corner of the Central African Republic, so they are sent to the mines instead. After all, why go to school when you could become rich in a day? All that is needed is a little know-how, muscle, and luck. But Felix and Blaise, who are just 16 and 13, had no other choice. Their parents were killed by the Seleka, and they now have to fend for themselves. Day in and day out, they now dig and sieve for diamonds under a blazing sun. They found just one diamond in the last year, but still they dream of striking it rich. But for those children who do decide to go to school, there's no guarantee of a brighter future. Here in Wanu, over 60 kids crowd under a thatched roof. There are no computers, no textbooks, no stationery. And with the lack of professionally trained teachers in the country, village elders are called upon to become educators. Gaston used to be a truck driver for a diamond company, and he only went to primary school for a few years himself. And so as part of this project, so the video was launched in English and French on 5 of Huffington Post's international sites, along with an online graphic novel. The idea being, and actually I have a copy here, the idea being that the graphic novel is effectively a companion to the 360 video that serves to provide additional context and testimony. And embedded within the book as well are QR codes, so that you can be reading the book on a bus or at home, in the bath even, if you will, and you can scan the QR codes with your smartphone. And again, the idea is to try and transport you from a sort of 3D object to this immersive environment. But the hope being that, accessing this through the smartphone, the tablet, the desktop computer, that, it allows us to provide thousands or millions of windows finally into the country that is Central African Republic. And I'll leave it there and hand it over to Geoffrey. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. My name is Geoffrey. I'm working for Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. I'm managing a small team of AV producer, and usually we produce photo, video, a bit of audio. And a few years ago, we saw the arrival of this new tool, 360. So for us, it's not, as Victoria, was a very dedicated approach to this new medium, but it's something that we add to our toolbox. And of course, MSF is doing communication based on operations on the ground, and this very obviously and very often takes us to situations that are not very accessible for many people. So we have different approach to that. We try to give access to journalists, as you saw, as much as possible, but sometimes we also produce things ourselves for different purposes. Would it be advocacy, acceptance, or sometimes just visibility? And we discovered that 360 video or VR is a very interesting tool to take people to our realities, to the things that we see on the ground, and in a very different and much more immersive way. So I won't take too much time to talk about it, but also one of our principles as MSF is bearing witness, so it's showing what we see on the ground and being also kind of taking the voice of the patient that we work with outside. I have a small clip to show, showing different kind of a compilation of productions that we did in the last years, and then I'm very open to have proper discussion and questions, and I'm sure it's going to be fun.
Which clip would you like first?
The demo reel. So it's only 2 minutes with different contexts. Mark, can you move on?
Sorry?
Can you make sure to turn around and... So as you see, we have done many different stuff, and also we used it to show to the people, but it's also a tool that we use sometimes for training. Before we send people in the field, we want them to really understand what they might face and to understand also this kind of situation from the inside, sometimes from the point of view also of a victim, as we did with the mass casualty exercise that we will talk about later. So yeah, that's it. And I don't know if I need to talk about the MSF now, but just to say that MSF has always used the media. It's an organization that have been also founded by doctors and journalists. So it's in our DNA since the beginning to use media and also to use the new tools coming around that.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to start with just a really simple, basic question. I mean, as I said, 360 has been touted as the next new thing. I mean, as with drones and GoPro cameras and things like that. So, I mean, from your experience, I mean, do you think that 360 video really does evoke empathy, or is it just a gimmick? Anybody.
No, I think it's certainly not a gimmick, just a gimmick. As I said, I think it can be. I think, someone who takes it to a press conference, yeah, that's a gimmick. If you have 360 in here, that would be a gimmick. If used correctly, it's immensely powerful. But it has to be used at the right place, in the right time, in the right way. For me, I've said before, it's all about location. So the thing that I did that was most successful, that did best, was all about location. It was in a helicopter. We strapped it to the underside of an attack helicopter as it went over Mosul. Now, that isn't about empathy or poverty porn. That's just putting the viewer in an amazing location that there is no other way to go. And it's remarkable to watch. I might see if we can show a clip of that later, actually. But so in that case, definitely not a gimmick. But I think it can also be overplayed, the extent to which 360 is able to transform, people's opinions on things. And if you've seen the talk that Chris Milk gave, he talks about it as though this is unlike anything we've ever seen before, and anything we've ever done before, and that's just not true. The power of traditional video, sometimes, you see the stuff that's been done by correspondent small organizations over the years that has really changed people's view of the world. Traditional video has that power. 360 does as well, but not every time. I think it's very easy to think of this as something completely different, unlike anything we've done before, and I think it's not. It's just a different way to use pictures and sounds to tell a story. It can be amazingly effective, but it can be used badly.
Did you want to show a quick clip, or...?
Oh, let's have some more discussion first.
Okay, go for it.
Yes, I totally agree with Joe that we have to be very mindful how we use this medium. It's very powerful, but it has to be used correctly. Because it's not only about location, right? It shouldn't be just excitement for someone to see, wow, look how it would feel like to be in somewhere after the earthquake or something like that. It should be a story first and foremost. And what we do, we strive to have characters in those stories. So basically, you are traveling with someone who is living there and can tell you exactly how it feels to live there, and would actually give the power to that story and how they survive those things. So you wouldn't just be excited about being in that place, but you would understand better what issues are and how those people are living every day with those issues and how they're struggling and how they're finding solutions. So that's very interesting, and that's what we always strive to do.
Yeah, I agree on that. Just to give an example, I'm sure many of you have seen a lot of images about migration roads in Europe, and I had the experience a few times. We did a production on migration in 360 and took it to some events, some theater play after the theater play, whatever, and people try it, and after that they say, "Oh, thanks a lot," because I've seen these images a lot of times, but now I understand it from another point of view. I really understand it from the inside. I mean, you saw these images of it's the Serbian border, I think. When you are inside the headset with that, it's quite powerful, to the point that sometimes it can be very traumatic. This is something that we approach also beforehand, is that I had the experience of a production, and I was showing it to one of my colleagues, an experienced field worker with MSF, someone who have been in very difficult places. I gave him the headset, not telling him exactly what was coming, but we had discussed about the project beforehand. And then he take it off, and he was very mad at me. He told me, "Are you crazy to give it to me like this? You should have prepared me. You should have told me, what is this?" It takes me back to very difficult times that I had to go through. And to the point that after that, now we are thinking twice when we show something. And the next production that have been done by MSF after that, there was a whole work of preparing and like briefing and debriefing the people before they watch it. So this production is not something that you can find online. It's something that has been used for advocacy purposes, to specific going to decision makers. But basically, they have worked with a psychologist to determine a kind of a process before you watch it, how to get prepared, and after you watch it, how was it and how do you feel? Because I don't know, I'm sure you had this experience showing 360 and you have people in tears afterwards because it's very intense.
Well, I think actually you allude there to something which is a really, really important point, and I'm sure we'll come back to, is the fundamental difference between the experience of watching a 360 film as you see there, and if you watch on a desktop, or it's interesting, and you go, "Oh, this is amazing, interesting, I can look around." The difference between that as an experience and watching on a headset, they're incomparable. And I think that is something that is, and especially from a broadcasting point of view, we know that for the most part, we're not taking it to someone, putting it on their head and saying, "Here, watch that." We have to stick it out on YouTube, stick it out on a site, And we assume that most people are going to be watching it just on a desktop or maybe on their phone. And that's a very, very different experience to the headsets. I think, actually, as we say, we're having a thing afterwards. So it is worth, if you haven't done it, it's worth going and seeing it up close because it's completely, completely transformative.
And I want to add to that because that's exactly happened with one of our films. So when we're talking that not all the stories work in 360, some of them really do. And what happened with our film, Forced to Flee, which we filmed in Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh, it was really... and we even talked about it in the team, how actually 360 showed better the scale of the crisis and how many people are there and how packed are the camps and how muddy are the roads and all these kind of things. So maybe let's see the clip, like a short clip from that film, Forced to Flee. Just a couple of shots.
بس بقول أنا سقول كده إنه كي قريبا كان خطهم قاعد دعهم قريب شديد.
ويرى هورين إترا الدكتور بعد زورون قريب بعد إترا زبون دوشون درجة ملتين هم بيكون زورون جد. عرض شما ده عرض منظم من هم جدّو. تقول قرادي عرض فوق ده زت فريقة بڑا زت مري محل ولا يتاكل محل ولا.
And we partnered to do this film with Amnesty International, and we brought this film actually physically, as Joe was talking, with the headsets to the UN Security Council, and we showed this to some UN Security Council members. And they really said that it actually gave them additional and deeper understanding of the issue. And the Polish representative said that it was very powerful material. It's one thing to hear about it, and it's another thing to see it with your own eyes. So actually, that's how he felt, and I think that shows how powerful it can be. Because especially in this, in these times when we have so many news coming out, we read everything bits and pieces on Twitter or something. This can give us a better understanding, deeper understanding of the issues that that are happening in the world.
And I mean, I just want to ask you guys, do you think that this medium has maybe been different to other medium in the sense of trying to change people's minds about particular events? I mean, I know that people maybe who have been sort of right-wingers who have been critical about the refugee crisis, what's going on in Bangladesh, people, for example, who maybe vote UKIP and read the Daily Mail. I don't know, do you find that, if them being transported, that has actually maybe changed people's viewpoints? I don't know if you measure analytics or, clicks or how long people stay with the story that suggests engagement?
This is entirely unscientific, obviously, but so the 360 I showed the first clip of, which is, immersive 360 on a migrant boat, and you see people there, and they are telling the most appalling stories. There are people with marks of torture on their back, and it's really terrible things. And we had to switch comments off because it certainly didn't seem, from what people were saying underneath, that it was engendering empathy. Which is a sad thing to have to admit, but it's true. And I know there are issues around. We're probably doing it towards the end of the. There'd been a lot of coverage for a long time about the migrant crisis in Europe, and I know through discussions with people at MSF, it's a difficult issue, the use of the boats in the Mediterranean. But we didn't find there was that much, empathy coming through.
If it was that simple. No, of course not. It's not a magic tool, but it's one element amongst other to start the discussion and to make people think and understand a bit better situation that very often they don't really know, they don't really understand, and they think this is the answer I should give to it, but actually they don't know what they are talking about. So it's an additional tool, as I said before, to broaden the discussion.
Victoria, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I agree with the point.
Well, actually, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but literally just a couple of weeks ago, the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism published a paper that was written by Dan Archer and Katharina Finger in March, actually. So it was basically a survey of 180 people. They were given a number of different clips to watch, and then this academic paper was based on that sort of questionnaire. So one of the key findings, and this is sort of riffing off the idea of vicarious trauma and what to show, what not to show in a sensitive manner, they found or suggested that be cautious about showing too many scenes that can cause viewer discomfort. Scenes of harsh conditions and suffering can drastically affect user comfort and enjoyment, triggering disengagement from the material and contributing to a drop in long-term memory recall and engagement. We recommend interspersing such scenes with less charged and more neutral material to counterbalance the effect. So, I mean, I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, if you're trying to show the scale of the problem in Bangladesh, I mean, I can see what they're saying, that on the one hand, you want to do it in a tasteful way, but on the other hand, you know, as journalists, as filmmakers, we want to basically show how shitty the situation is. So, do you agree with this statement? I mean, in terms of trying to get that, and well, how do you get that balance?
I think the most important is to remember, even if we're doing virtual reality or we're using these advanced technologies, we're still, first and foremost, we're journalists, right? And the ethics of journalism, that's what's the most important. So I think vetting what kind of shots should go where, it comes from our understanding as journalists. So I don't see it as very different from what discussions we would have whether to show it on the screen. Of course, you have to think that it could be more powerful and it could actually cause trauma for some people even more when you show it on the headset. But there are also different ways. You can, for example, you can create different versions that you post on Facebook or you post on a headset. You know, you can think, because this is more technical thing, but for example, when we do different versions for our social media and headsets, we think about some moving shots. They really cause nausea for people, so we change those. So, you know, you should have these discussions, we should have these discussions, but I think it just comes from the same place as any other discussion in journalism.
I mean, to agree with you, I think that exact sentence could have been written about, you know, the conversations you have, you know, for a traditional news piece. I mean, we make decisions about the showing of, I mean, we don't, for example, I don't know what your policy is, BBC doesn't show moment of death, there's just a blanket policy, we don't show that moment. And if you're going to show a dead body, it's done very lightly, very carefully and with great judgment. It's very easy to think, it's a new medium, everything's new. It's not, it's good, traditional, editorial, journalistic judgment.
Yeah, I agree, and also we don't have to always show misery. We can also show positive story, like with any other media. And one of our most used 360 video is actually basically a visit of a field hospital in Central African Republic that we take to the street to show the people a bit the way we use the money that we collect. And so it's there's nothing like misery or whatever. It's a positive story of a woman giving birth, and you go to the hospital with the doctor to understand a bit how they work, what is the reality in the field, and how the support of MSF has improved their daily life. So it depends also. I mean, there are different ways of telling stories. Of course, sometimes you need to show bad or difficult stuff, but not all the time.
I mean, on that note, I mean, as a charitable organisation, one could understand the need, or the desire to potentially use this sort of powerful medium to try and increase donations, for example. So, I mean, how do you mitigate that? How are you conscious of that? Obviously, you want people to donate, but at the same time, you don't want to, manipulate people necessarily. But so I mean, I don't know. Is that something that you're conscious of?
I was a bit expecting that kind of question, to be honest.
I figured I'd get it in there in case somebody out there asked.
No, of course, it's, as I said before, it's another medium, but it's the same problem with, would it be photo exhibition or video on TV? So it's always a balance to find. We have for principles to always talk about what we see on the ground, and we also have very strict ethical guidelines. We work with professionals, people, and to be honest, yes, we've used some images to raise some money. That's true. but not whatever images. There's a whole filter between the images that we receive from the ground and the one that we actually distribute. And so we are very careful about what we do with this content. And for example, the policy that we have in terms of consent, etc., is very strict, and is getting even more stricter with the GDPR regulation that is coming soon. And we are not a media organization. We are a humanitarian organization. Our goal is different. Our goal is to protect the people, is to protect the patient that we work with. And so sometimes we just drop the camera on the floor and help them. Or, what I mean is, we don't have, if we have to choose between a very nice shot and protecting the patient, the choice is done. And this is something that we are very clear about. So yes, we've used some images to go in the street and to show the people the reality that we are facing, but not whatever images. There's a whole process of selection and very strict guidelines and barriers about that.
And I'm curious, you don't necessarily have to name names, but have you seen any examples of 360 out there where you thought, that's overwrought, or that is poverty porn 2.0?
To be honest, I don't have 360 in mind, but in photography, yes. But I will not name anyone. They will recognize themselves, I'm sure.
Victoria, Joe, same question.
No.
Yeah. Again, I can't in 360. As again, I can in traditional media. I come to the point I made before. You stick a 400mm telephoto lens on the front of your camera. You can get some really quite exploitative, intimate images, far more so than you do from a camera which is essentially a couple of super wide-angle lenses or 6 super wide-angle lenses bolted together. You could stick one here, and my face would be in the distance. You can use one of these, use a big broadcast camera, and I can get a close-up of anyone in this room. It's actually much easier to get an exploitative image with a traditional media.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. One freelancer who has been working with us, she's a photographer in Sierra Leone. So I found her through online, and I trained her how to do 360 because I wanted to do one story from Sierra Leone. And she got really excited about this medium, and she said that actually she felt while doing the story and when seeing the results, she felt like it was even more honest for her, because she said, I needed maybe like 5 or more photos to actually show what's the situation. And also, as you were saying, with the photos, you can crop something out, with video as well, you choose like specific cuts. And with 360, it's much more difficult. It's basically what's out there, that's what you see. So that's what was her that's what she saw when she moved or tried a new medium, and she's photojournalism based. Yeah.
Do you think that we could say that before we were framing with a camera, you can really frame something, and now the frame is actually the distance where you put the camera. That's how you somehow frame it, and would you put the camera here or over there to see the whole crowd? I think this also can be a kind of framing.
Definitely, but you would still see what's happening behind. You cannot hide that, So there are things that actually this medium brings.
And I'm curious, Victoria. So you, as we've seen, you often work with local journalists or local filmmakers. Have you found that they do approach a story differently in terms of how they shoot and what they shoot?
In 360?
Mm-hmm.
No, I really don't think so. I think, again, these are just journalists, really strong journalists that we work with, and they find this new medium that they can actually tell the stories in that new medium. So for them, it's just challenging. Of course, it's challenging to hide from the shot, right? Or not be able to be with a character closer. You just basically have to be behind the scenes more than we're used to as journalists if you're a photographer or you're a filmmaker, right? But I think the stories, they just found that, there is a different way to tell stories, and then they can do maybe different stories that they never thought of, that maybe 360 makes it more powerful stories, more impactful stories.
And actually, a question for Joe and Geoffrey. So I know that you've both, and this could equally apply actually to the camps in Bangladesh, but in terms of working and doing the films about refugees on the boats in the Mediterranean, in terms of informed consent, obviously you're capturing tens, dozens, hundreds of people. Presumably you don't get consent from every single person there, so how do you approach that?
it is a genuinely problematic issue. We get get the in this case MSF staff to let everyone know it's happening, and it is a difficult one. I mean, the main actually kind of the way you get around it is that for the most part, people in the distance, you can't see people's faces. People are relatively, unless you get up close, people are anonymous. And so what you do is that you make sure that if you're going to feature someone close up, you get their consent. So there's a scene in the film where there's a guy walking, holding giving out the food. And we obviously get him, and you use a section where you make sure those people there have said yes. But it's difficult. It really is. If you're in, in the refugee camp, there's no way you can say to 100,000 people who are there. I mean, the other thing that you just do to people is if there are people around, you just say, if you don't want to be on the camera, we're only filming for 30 seconds, turn your head the other way, and people's faces are gone. But it is probably, I would argue, it's the big ethical challenge around 360 filming.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add on that. It's exactly the same, but it's true that consent is always a big issue. What we try to do is that as soon as we, kind of focus on a proper one main character, then we are very, very cautious about making sure that you have a proper informed consent. We take time to do it, and hopefully we have the support of local translator, else promoter, things like this. And also in some specific situation, like a stigma situation with HIV, with Ebola, we are very, very strict with that. And so there's a lot of limitations, and very often when we have freelancers or media coming, they are very frustrated with us because I'm sorry, but we cannot do that, we cannot shoot that, and it can be very, very frustrating. I'm sure you.
I was going to say, as someone who's worked with MSF on the boat, they are very, very strict. Not overly so, but and actually to agree with what Geoffrey was saying before, and just to kind of reinforce your point, I'm told when I'm on the boat, if I am told that I'm needed to do something, if there's a mass casualty, I drop my camera, even though I'm a journalist. Even the journalists are told, if we need you, even if it's just for lifting stuff, you drop your camera and you work. And it never happened, and it's a difficult point, but that is the rules they make.
And just to add about the boat itself, I've been on the very first trip, and my role was exactly that. It was to see what was possible or not, to what extent we can take externals or not, and to draft kind of a guidelines. And at the beginning, we tried not to show images of the rescuer themselves, but at some point it was necessary, and we had to find a balance between what we can show or not. But it was necessary to show what was actually happening there, because it was a nightmare for us. And it still is, actually.
Yeah. I want to add as well. I think what's important to understand also that with 360, we document not only the main character, but also the entire community. So the necessity of high quality, honest reporting is even greater. And we have to always think that this film is going to represent the community. And talking about the consent, yes, it's impossible to get consent from everyone. But what our job entails most of the time, because of that, it entails a lot of explanation and explaining to the people, to the characters, to the people who are around. So basically, we try to do as much as possible and answering the questions honestly. If somebody asks, what is this medium, how it's being done, we definitely take time to explain how this works and how they will appear in this film, and do they want to be, these conversations are very important to have.
And maybe if I can, I would like to know in this room who have ever experienced 360 headset. Can you raise your hand if you tried it once? Ooh. So it's even not half of them, and we are supposed to be in a, maybe not exactly representative population of journalists or interested in journalists. So that shows that another challenge that we have is when we go and filming in the field, one of the first things, if you work with some specific people, some specific character, you have to make them experience. Otherwise, they don't understand what is these little balls that you are using. Most of the people, they know what is a television. They know what is a photo, what is the radio, but they don't know what is 360. So you have to really take it to them and make them experience. I'm sure. Maybe I was
going to say, just on that note, the reason I've just pulled up this photo is there was a funny story behind this photo that, I was collaborating with this local community in this, where they had this big open cast artisanal diamond mine. And I collaborated, I'd gone and see the community chief, and he said, yes, it's fine for you to shoot and interview the kids working in the mine. And so everybody knew, who I was, what I was doing, and yet I sort of set up the camera, started shooting, and I could tell that there was some disquiet, some unhappiness amongst the people working in the mine. So I said to my translator, I said, "Oh, do you mind just finding out? I get the sense that all's not well." And he came back to me and he says, they think that I just use a Ricoh Theta, they think that your camera is like an ultrasound device, that you're here from a foreign mining company, that you're actually here trying to sort of find if there are diamonds here and where they are, that effectively you're going to steal their diamonds. So even despite community engagement and trying to tell them what it was I was doing, I ended up having one of the boys put on the headset, and I just shot some test footage from a Scottish park. And so this is just a photo of him immersed in a Scottish park, which was, I think, quite bizarre for him. But just to show that even if you do engage with the community and you're trying to exactly inform them about what it is you're doing, it doesn't always work. So on that note, I'm aware that we've got 20 minutes left, and so true to my word, I want to try and open it up to questions. So fire away. Yes.
I'm really interested to hear more about how you're working with characters within documentary process within 360. Because one of the things that's going through my mind is the distance that a super wide angle creates. I mean, I know what you're saying about, big, juicy, exploitative close-ups, but at the same time, I do a lot of live work, and one of the most powerful things is when people talk to the camera, because they have control and agency because they're talking live. I may be asking questions, but there's an immediacy there. So I was wondering about the agency of the subjects that you're interviewing and what the differences are between conventional video and the challenges and how you problem solve so that your subjects are empowered rather than being disempowered.
I think that's a great question, Victoria.
Yeah, sure. So what we do is we actually ask them to answer the questions so we do normally interviews, audio interviews, so we base the narration on that, right? But then we tell them, you have something to tell. You want to tell the story. Tell it to the camera as if you're telling someone who will watch you. So we're trying to create this connection between the viewer and the character. So of course it needs to, again, explanation what it is, how someone will see you. But I think it's again brings this very interesting aspect that the viewer can actually look eye to eye with the subject, and the subject is not someone telling the story to someone, but telling the story to you. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting aspect, and I think the people really, they feel like they're telling the message. They sometimes even start with that, my message to the world, or my message to someone who is watching this is that and that. And I think it's what they can actually say what they want. And we are not even around, so sometimes it's a very, it's the personal experience of the character who can tell the story to someone who will be watching, straight looking into the eye.
I think my experience has been being realistic about it, unless you happen to get a subject who is able to deliver, a really compelling the script of a really compelling 5-minute video just off the cuff to the camera like that, which I've personally never come across. You need to have edited audio, especially if it's, because and that is very difficult, because if someone is talking to the camera, you can't edit it because it'll look jumpy. You need to have a single continuous shot. So what I've done in the past, and I've seen a lot of people do, is essentially do an audio interview, sit into a radio interview somewhere else, and you can get all of the material you need to allow you, so you can then subsequently edit it together so that person is telling their story, but they're telling it in a way that is concise and keeps the viewer engaged. And the way you get around that by still maintaining that engagement with the viewer is that you quite often see this, is a shot, an opening shot and an establishing shot, which is in your central location. It's just them eyeballing the camera, and they're there kind of just looking, and you'll have that as your opening shot. So you do get that feeling that the person is telling their story, because it's their voice and it's their face and you can see their eyes, but you're not having, just someone's, I don't know how, some people might be excellent, but generally not that coherent or not that concise opening thought. Or you don't have them staring, you can have them acting, but you combine those two things, and I think you get probably a decent kind of combination of them telling their story and it being concise.
Yeah, maybe I recommend that you watch a VR experience called The Enemy, when you are between actually two people from two different, let's say, world, two different point of view, and they are talking to each other. Would it be an Israeli soldier and a Palestinian? And it's quite interesting because you are in between four eyes and can watch one another, and you can turn around, they are there and you're in the middle, and it's very interesting to watch. So that's a good example of things you can do that is a bit unusual, but it's an interesting experience.
Great. Any other questions? So, lady just here in the second row.
Do you think that a 360 in this context could be a form of infotainment, like entertainment, bringing together the entertainment experience plus the information? Because I saw a lot of videos and I don't think there is a lot of empathy actually, and even the user behavior is not, there is no interaction sometimes like other videos. So any danger of infotainment to bring together stories, serious stories and issues with a form of entertainment?
Well, so I was just going to say, in terms of you talking about, you didn't feel maybe engaged with some of the clips. I mean, I guess granted, these are just clips, and I certainly invite you to wear one of the headsets afterwards, because I know from sort of testing on family guinea pigs, not literally guinea pigs, but family members, that would be strange. That it's completely, watching it on desktop versus watching it in the headset is a completely different experience. And you know, a whole bunch of studies have been written on that to say that effect. I mean, just as a bit of a segue, I should also say that, I mean, you're talking about infotainment. I know that 360 is even being used in the porn industry. Don't ask me how I know, but apparently this is the case. Anyway, moving on. I don't know if you guys would like to.
I'll get you out of this one. No, it's interesting you say that, because that is one of the criticisms of the helicopter thing I did. It got, you know, some people thought, you know, amazing, you can see this, I properly understand it, and I went out of my way to make the commentary as neutral as possible. It was almost like a guided tour of the city, showing people what the landmarks were, but still, and it was really, I was deliberately flat in my commentary. Still, one of the repeated criticisms that people said is, you're making this look like a computer game. You're trying to make this makes it, you know, make this look entertaining, and it's obviously what I wanted to say, although it's difficult to say. I'm not making it look like a computer game. Computer games have been made to look like this. This is simply a completely honest and total picture of what it is actually like to be, you know, underneath the wing of this helicopter. I'm not making it look like entertainment. It's just that entertainment has become so much like the real world. So yes, you're right, but my answer is, it's not that we're looking like computer games. It's that we're finally showing people the real world which computer games have been modeled on for so long. In fact, is it now? Can you show a little clip of that? Just if there's a minute. Is there not
like,
time?
Yeah, maybe if.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah,
to that?
just one thing is that it can be a bit true. I mean, if you go to the street with some pictures, with some photo, or with a TV, with some videos, no one will really stop. If you go with these headsets, they will stop. They want to try it. So, in some point, there is a kind of attractivity from this new tool. But then, if that helps you to take your message and to take what you really want to say to the people, and for them to understand and to really watch it, then it works for me. It's worth it. Then what's inside, I really encourage you to try it afterwards, and I'm sure you will change your mind, because it's
not my opinion. I'm speaking about users.
All right.
It is a very fair point.
Okay, another question.
Thank you. I'm just curious, really, as to whether you think that this kind of new 360 video will ever get to a point where it kind of takes over from like traditional media, or whether you think they're two things that tell different stories in different ways. Just really curious.
Yeah, very shortly. I always say, let the Facebook founders tell that it's the future, and we will gonna see if it's the future. But I think it's just another way of telling the stories, and traditional media is not going to disappear anytime soon, because it has a different function. Because when it's a breaking news story, we all turn on TV and we all, you know, go to like breaking news BBC or CNN or Al Jazeera to actually see what's going on. I know, right? Just being very kind.
Well, I was going to say, I'd just like to interject there as well, and I'm a great believer that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So I I wouldn't use 360 for every project. I've done lots of graphic novel projects, and that medium is great, but it doesn't work for every single project. So you really have to think of, when drones first came out, everybody and their dog was using drones. I've seen some terrible examples of 360 where people are just sat in a really bland office doing an interview, one-on-one interview, and they're using 360. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And then it gives 360 filmmakers a sort of, it gives them a harder task to then try and say, hey, watch my really cool 360 project about refugee crisis. And they'll think, oh, no, I'd rather not.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, and I think the short answer is no. The long answer is, so my primary job is going out and doing traditional 16:9 or digital filmmaking. My ambition is to try and do 2 360s a year. I think that's basically and that's, I think, is ambitious, because for the vast majority of stories, it's not the most effective way to tell them, but for some stories, it's far and away the best. So it's part of a mixed economy of storytelling.
Same here, and just to add that this is a very, even if it's not new anymore, it's really the early ages, and the grammar is not developed, and even the technology is evolving a lot. Now we are filming in 4K, but 6K and 8K is coming, so there will be a possibility to zoom in the image. I mean, it's just the beginning, so it's a bit early to say how it will evolve, but if you look at the big players, they are investing a lot in the technology, so I suppose it's going to be there for a few years at least.
Yeah, I think at this point I would say that it's gonna stay. It's just a matter of what kind of stories we're gonna tell in that way, and maybe some other technology will appear. Maybe we're gonna have AR stories or mixed reality stories, right? Like every day, seeing stories like that. But I don't think any of these technologies will just. We're not, at least not in the upcoming 10 years. We're not that it's the only way we're gonna watch everything. So definitely not. But I think it's here to stay. This medium definitely.
Any other questions? Maybe can we take...
I've got a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm over here. I've had the microphone for a while. I was wondering, as a journalist, when your main job is to go out and tell the story you need to tell in the best way possible, you've partially answered this question already, but how often does it actually come up that you can use 360? Or do you find yourself choosing stories that you maybe wouldn't have originally considered because you see, oh, this is an opportunity to use 360?
I would do, yeah. If there was something that came up and I was like, oh my God, I could do an amazing 360 on that, then yes, I would just go and do it. I'd probably go and film it normally as well, but I would do a 360 specific deployment. But no, in general, I think, okay, it's all and this is actually different. So Victoria is part of a team that does just 360, and you can go and put days and days and days into it, and you come up with an amazing product, as you can see. Whereas for me, I have to do it as part. So I will go out, I'll be shooting and editing and working with one of our languages correspondent and doing that at the same time. So in that shot, you could see in the 360, I'm actually holding the camera next to it and doing 360 at the same time. So you have to be quite specific about the times you do it, because otherwise you end up with something rubbish. I think it's, yeah, I would, obviously, being kind of making a broad statement, a couple of times a year, and I might go and do, 15 big deployments, and I'll use it on a couple of them.
And I mean, I'm typically the same. I mean, I'll have a particular project in mind, thinking this is going to make for a great 360. That having been said, though, again, I just use the Ricoh Theta V, which is a great little camera. It's smaller than an iPhone. It fits in your backpack, and as long as you've got a tripod, then if you are out in the field and you think, you know what, I could get some good 360 clips here, then away you go. It's click and play. It stitches in camera. Spatial audio, all that good stuff. I don't have any Theta shares, I swear, but so it's part of that sort of Mojo kit that I think that you have. That you'll have your DSLR, you have your little 360 camera as well, and so you can do stuff on the fly if need be. Do you guys have anything to add to that? No. Okay. Any more questions?
I have a question for Victoria first. How and where did you train Manal and Ahmed? Did you train them in Lebanon? And did you train them also to answer if Houthis will question them? Because I'm saying as a person who works in Yemen, due to my double nationality, we really risk a lot to be jailed. And when militias, they come to us, even though we have an iPhone. And third question, did you train them also how to take care of their equipment? Because we used to have problems even before the war, just for our Mac, how to repair them, and it was necessary to send them to Dubai. So I just was wondering about that.
Yeah, so the process was quite long. UNESCO helped us to bring the cameras to the journalists, and UNESCO helped us choose the journalists that they thought that were really strong, and we then started the communication with those journalists to see whether we should work together, right? So they got the cameras in Jordan, and then they brought the cameras back home to Yemen. The way the whole process worked, it was really long, and the internet was very poor, so we used WhatsApp messages and WhatsApp voice notes. So basically not being even able to communicate normally was such a challenge. So they would always send us back some footage, we would send them back the notes, and they would go back and forth. So it took us 4 months to create the documentary that we have now. In terms of, more the situation in Yemen, I mean, these journalists, this is what the stories they wanted to tell. So we asked them, actually, they pitched the stories what they wanted to tell, right? So we didn't approach them saying, oh, we want to do about airstrikes, find something. They actually told us that this is what they want to show, and this is their message to the world. So I know Ahmad really had issues as well, and it was difficult for him. It's all these permits. It was really complicated. Also, he said people were really not trusting media. It was a really big challenge, and especially when you come with this 360, which nobody understands even more, and it was really challenging. But yeah, but I think we did the best we could, and we're really proud of the work they've done, the journalists themselves, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. Yeah.
Okay, I think we maybe can try and squeeze in a couple more questions. Sorry? No time. Oh, no time? Oh, we don't have 5 more minutes? No, because we have another panel. Okay. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up then. So just a quick, I've been told. So just a quick reminder, we're going to be outside for about the next half an hour with our little informal VR pop-up. So please come out and experience these films with us, or if you just got general questions about software, hardware, that kind of thing. Thanks very much, and thank you to my fellow panel members.
Sorry, I'm doing a very, very shameless plug. My 360 film is up for a Webby, and I've got to win a popularity vote against David Attenborough, which I'm clearly going to lose. But if you can go onto the Webbies and vote for Best 360 Film, it'd be really appreciated. Sorry, that's really shameless.
Great. Thanks very much, guys. And again, thanks to the panel.